So thank you all for joining today. Again, extreme weather. According to Munich Re, which is a global reinsurance forum, over the first 6 months of 2017, the United States alone had 49 climate and flood disasters with an overall cost of $21 billion with a B dollars. Now that is a lot of contingency funds. That's a lot of what if planning to be done. I think now more than ever in our current environmental state, making sure that you have on the fly what if scenario planning for your supply chain. You know, if a plant goes down for 6 months, you know, if there's a surge in demand due to weather events, if your raw material transport lanes get cut off due to, you know, unprecedented blizzards, do you have planning in place to work around it and make sure that you can meet the needs of your customers? That's what IBP planning is all about. And we're going to go through a couple scenarios today. We're going to get live in the tool, but mostly we're going to talk about how you can make sure to weather the storm and plan appropriately. So let's get moving. So here's our agenda. As we said, a little introduction overview. We'll talk about IBP overview, the advantages of the platform. We'll look at the what-if simulation capabilities of the software, simulations versus versions explained, the differences, and then we're going to hop in the system and do a live demo of some capacity planning. So a little bragging about SCM Connections, why we're qualified to be here today, I guess. We are a leading North American APO and IBP implementer. Those are SAP's supply chain management products. An average of 17 years of supply chain experience throughout our partners and a combined century of experience in our leadership, serving right now 31 clients globally, Europe, Asia, Africa, all around the world, and we're very, very proud of that. But we're not just IBP. We also have advanced analytics as a service, helping people really push the boundaries of their supply chain from an analytics standpoint, and our machine learning applications. We've ventured into AI and machine learning to help do some predictive analytics for our customers and build some really advanced tools in R and Python to help them look at demand forecasting in new and different ways, look at price elasticity, and really fun things like that. So we're very proud of our breadth and depth of supply chain knowledge. So again, with our SAP relationship, we're very, very proud to be one of the first recognized experts of SAP IBP in the United States. So that's a combination of certified consultants and outstanding reviews from our customers based on our implementation and advanced support projects. So it's not an easy designation to get, and we're very, very proud to be the first. But again, business and industry knowledge, that's really what sets SCM Connections apart, and our global implementation experience. So hopping in, I see a lot of familiar names. So I know you may be familiar with IBP, but for those of you who aren't, Integrated Business Planning Platform, different than the process. It's the name of the SAP software tool, and you'll see in front of you the different modules available in IBP. The big ones we're going to be looking at today being the S&OP module, and then the response and supply, looking at constrained and unconstrained supply planning, and then your overall S&OP process. But there's also, of course, demand, inventory, and then the supply chain control tower looking out over them. What makes this so unique is that it all runs on that unified HANA platform for cloud deployment, which means instead of a server in your house that IT has to keep up, IBP lives in the cloud. So every quarter there's new updates to IBP pushed from SAP, so the software is constantly evolving based on user feedbacks and what the users really deem as important. And it makes it extremely usable. Instead of waiting for IT to give you a data extract, you know, it's all at your fingertips, pushed down from the cloud in seconds, which is really amazing. So that IBP Advantage, as we talked about, it's the HANA Cloud, performance, reliability, supportability. And for the first time, you really have that end-to-end data planning model. You can see your supply chain all the way from beginning to end, and you know how one piece upstream affects everything downstream. And that's really new and unique. We've had to hobble that together in the past, and it's really wonderful. You'll see as we're in the demo, if you change consensus demand at the beginning, what does that do to capacity further downstream? It's really fantastic. And then again, just the modern user experience. You know, we're in supply chain, Excel is kind of our best friend. So rather than learning, you know, keystrokes or kind of archaic commands, you're working in Excel, in a tool that you're infinitely comfortable with, and all of the formulas and right clicks and what have you that you're used to in Excel are right there with you in IBP. And on top of that, you get the new planning algorithms. So the predictive analytics, demand sensing, the multi-echelon inventory positioning, just some really, really cool stuff that unless you have a brilliant analyst sitting beside you, may not have been an option before. And again, you can simulate your entire supply chain for the first time. It's a unified planning area, which means all of your supply, demand, consensus data is all right there in one place. So you have the ability to use it all and model it all to get a whole picture view of your supply chain. So IBP really is a case study in synergy. It allows us to have open and full conversations all the way through the sales and operations planning process and all the way through your supply chains. It can take different data sources. IBP is system agnostic, so it can take flat files from any of your other planning systems if you're not an SAP house. You can combine flat files from different systems if your company has been through mergers and acquisitions and you're running on different platforms in different geographies. IBP really does a lot to support that. You can finally have a conversation, a global conversation about your entire supply chain regardless of your data sources. And it's also a translator for your different business interests. You know, in the past, translating between units or dollars or cases or pallets was really onerous. It required a lot of communication. And if your formulas went astray, you know, goodness help you. For the first time, each user can really use the lens of IBP and translate the data to what is meaningful for them, whether it's dollars for finance, you know, pallets for the CD or DCs, or, you know, cases for sales. It really allows you to put the data in a format that means something to you. So these are some statistics from SAP of the improvement that being on integrated business planning can really provide to a customer. You know, increased customer satisfaction when you can provide them with really up-to-date, accurate inventory data, a reduction in revenue losses, reduction in manufacturing costs, because you finally have that real-time insight into where your materials are and how they're flowing. Reduction in your order lead times, because again, you have that real time available to promise functionality, and the same in inventory levels. You're not holding quite so much safety stock, almost as a security blanket, because you can see through the process where your stock is. You can see how everything's flowing rather than having to hedge. So that's, you know, information is power, and this is a really powerful tool in supply chain. So we talked about the integration, maybe the very best part of this tool. You've got finance and supply chain finally able to have this, you know, Rosetta Stone of speaking in their own languages, but pulling it all together into a common report or common platform. You've got demand and supply together. You can finally go from customer all the way out to vendor. And then you have the availability of creating these versions, which are whole data copies to do things like capital planning or, you know, expansion planning. So rather than having to create master data and APO, which is, again, a really onerous process, you can take a snapshot of the data, move it over to the side, and do all of your version what-if planning there, which is just wonderful. And then the data integration, again, you're planning a new business, you've got a common platform, you're simulating data directly with updates and real-time data. instead of old snapshots in time. So that single planning area for your entire supply chain, the customer to the DC, to the central DC, to the plant, all the way through, that's a really unique enabler in IBP. Finally, you can see the upstream and downstream impacts of the decisions being made, how it flows all the way through your supply chain process. So you're really making truly educated decisions and truly educated strategic plans for your entire supply chain. So now we get into a few terms that we'll need to know for the live demo. And the big one is this idea of a scenario versus a version when you're doing what-if planning in IBP. So a scenario, this is the off-the-cuff, what if our plant goes down? You know, what if our demand surges because of a disaster and this product is, you know, the only one left in the market? What if our raw materials get cut off for a month? You know, you in minutes, you can update your spreadsheets, you can update these scenarios. You can save them as your own personal favorites. You can share them with specific colleagues, but it's really the what if spitballing that's so powerful because it was so time consuming in the past, if it was possible at all, with all the disparate data sources. So the scenario planning is one of my favorite pieces of it. You know, I have a whole list of Christie's demand plan, Christie's demand scenario, all the way down through however you like to see it. And when you finally get to a solution you like, maybe you share it with your colleagues, maybe you promote it, but then again, maybe you just say this is junk and you delete it. It's a really, really lovely kind of planning tool to work through all the options. Versions, however, are something a little bit bigger. It's a full copy of your base version of data, including all the key figures, all the master data. A version would be kind of a complex business scenario, something like your capital planning for the year or expansion planning. You know, what if we opened a whole new plant? What if we started serving Asia for the first time? You know, something in that regard. So it contains a lot more data and persistent data changes for those long-term analytics. So you can see IBP's got the power to just do those quick what ifs, but they also have the power to do much larger, big strategic plans as well. Again, this is a quick look at the simulations, the data side by side. It's temporary, so it's for you until you decide to promote it, delete it, whatever you want to do with it. It runs on the front end with real-time simulations. It's just great. And then again, supported by versions. Versions are full copies of all that master data over, so you can do full range projects. Okay. Almost there. So the demo supply network, this is just a really kind of simplistic mock-up of your supply network that one of our analysts, Nikki, was kind enough to pull together. But it's this kind of notion of what if, due to a catastrophe, you know, in the Americas, demand for product 1010 just surged to an all-time high. We've never seen demand for this product like this ever before. So how much capacity? Unfortunately, you know, it's a 1-to-1-to-1. 1010 is only made in Paris, and Paris is the only plant that provides that supply to our 3 DCs. So how much capacity can Paris churn before it just maxes out? It's a really interesting question. And what happens then, you know, if they short Beijing, if they short Madrid, how does those decisions, has the domino effect of those decisions really impact the rest of our business, the rest of our plants, the rest of our customers? So that, my friends, is what we're going to demo today. So let's go ahead and hop into IBP. I know that was amazing, wasn't it? We're there. Because at the end of the day, IBP is Excel. What you get when you purchase your IBP license is this beautiful add-in, this lovely IBP tab. And that tab contains all of your functionality. Let me move my little webinar controls so I can get in here. So we're going to walk through a scenario today of the capacity constraint that we just talked about. So at the end of the day, our goal of the supply chain is to meet all the demand we can, to make all the money we can, to not short any of our customers if we can avoid it, and to go about seeing how we can do that in a global situation. So we are going to stress test our supply chain. We're going to stress test our capacity. We're going to see if a high, a super high, and then a catastrophic scenario to see how far we can really push it. So we're going to talk through that customer demand. So my colleague Mike and I, on Friday nights, we like to do these, kind of what if scenario plans. So we already have this whole thing built out that we like to use. This is called our stress test favorites. So only Mike and I have access to it. It's just really a spitball. So we're going to pull that up. There we go. And you can see we've got all of our tabs all the way across our supply chain set up, starting with customer demand, moving to the DC and the customer, transportation, production, components, capacity, all the way down the flow of our supply chain. And you can see, this is really our first tab in the process, you can see our customer ID, product ID, our region in the Americas, and consensus demand. Before this catastrophe hit, this is what we thought our demand was going to be. So everything was, kind of perfectly planned out for the, smooth sailing. So let's go through our first kind of scenario of high demand. Demand spikes due to some kind of natural disaster in the Americas. If there's, flooding and there's a huge demand for bottled water, if there's, a horrible tornado, hurricane, buildings are going down and, rebuilding surges and, an unprecedented number of building materials are needed in this region. It really could be anything in our supply chain. So for this scenario, I'm really not interested in seeing customer ID. So the beautiful thing, it is Excel. All I'm going to do is right click, delete. I'm going to delete the entire column. And there we go. Now I'm looking at everything by that product ID. And product 100 is really the one I'm interested. This is the one that we think is just going to blow out of the water in the event of a catastrophe. So first, we're going to go ahead and we're going to view, edit. We're going to edit how we see this. Mike and I like to see things in different ways. It's really just personal preference. And this tab allows you to go ahead and put things in as you like to see them. So I like to see that customer region first because I'm only worried about the Americas right now. So we're going to do that. Move this over. So we're going to click OK. And we're going to see that change made. So now let's say, we thought, 250 to 300 was a good range. I think it's going to spike to around 5,000. So we're going to go there. And again, because it's Excel, we can just drag that across. I think that demand will hold until about week 45. So we're going to do that. And, I want to save this as my Christie's demand spike so I can compare it out to our baseline scenario later. Oh, it doesn't like my apostrophe. There we go. So it's saving the changes, and I just made myself a brand new little scenario. So there you can see in my graph too, all of a sudden my demand spiked, my receipts stay the same. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to click and just show you the beauty of it. I made a change in that one spreadsheet, and that change flows all the way through the rest of my tabs, through my supply chain, which is pretty snazzy. So I think demand's going to spike, but again, we're not quite sure how we're going to meet that need or if we can. So we're going to run one of the fanciest tools, in my opinion, IBP, the supply optimizer. So we're going to go through, we're going to pick the optimizer. We're going to compare my demand spike against the baseline. Down here, we're going to click next. We're going to click run. And this nice little window just told me that we were successfully scheduled. So there. We'll go ahead and hit refresh and wait for the optimizer to run. And see why you're doing this. If you were super fancy, you could go ahead and just theoretically create all your different scenarios together. You could do a super high spike, you could do a super duper high spike, you could do a catastrophe, and then you could compare them all to the baseline and see how it went. So you can see the optimizer ran, and now you'll see that the demand and the receipts are matching. So if our demand spikes up to 5,000 units, we can still supply it, is the great news. We'll go over to the capacity tab, let that update, and you'll see that our capacity utilization, the what if planning against the demand spike, that we're at 100%. So the good news is 5,000, we can still do it. The bad news is that's about all we can do. So you can do the what if then again. What if demand spikes to 10,000? And you'll see when I change something that the cell then becomes blue to let you know that you have an unsaved change, which again, pretty cool. So we'll go ahead and save that. Call it Christie's super high demand. And you'll see once it changes, those cells turn white. There we go. So one more time. Oops. We're going to run the supply optimizer and see what it does. So let's do it against the super high demand now. We're down here, change it to optimizer, and go. So, you know, in my past, when you're running off of flat data files and you're running your various scenarios, you've got pivot tables, you've got all these different analytic tools that you're manually refreshing and dealing with and trying to make sure that everything stays linked up, and then spreadsheets are getting emailed back and forth and back and forth. For the first time, you really have this one-stop shop where everyone is working off the same data and the same source of truth, and everyone's running their what-if scenarios based on the same information. So you can see our optimizer ran again, and you can see 10,000 starts to get a little dicey. Our customer receipts dip below our demand. So we're now having trouble supplying. But you can see it picks up again around week 41. So let's go back over to the capacity tab, let that update. And you can see that, yep, we've stressed the capacity as far as it goes. So you could now run this again for 20,000. You could run it, to find out exactly what you do. But it's a great scenario to go. I would have thought 5,000 did us then, but we could go up as high as 10,000, and that was something of a surprise. So again, this was our capacity scenario, looking to see all the way across your supply chain what it would mean if our demand spiked. Again, you can see it through production capacity lens. You can see what it does to inventory, all the changes all the way through. The lovely part about IBP is you can also set up some of your tabs, some of your costing. Here we go, and your opportunity costs, to have your inventory holding costs maybe be different between your DCs or your locations. You can have your transportation lane costs vary. So if you're running the supply optimizer to determine, how to optimize your transportation lanes, or how to keep your inventory holding costs optimized, in the lowest place as possible. Just the amount of planning and scenarios and different kind of what if versions you could really run to optimize your supply chain, to save money, to optimize your inventory. It's really astounding. You know, if you dream it, you can really build it in IBP. So that is our demo for today. And there's our customer demand. That was a scenario I wanted to show you in the system. So if we hop back out here, what questions do we have from the group about the power of IBP, other ways where you could determine potential if parts of your supply chain go down, plants go down, transportation lines close. All those are possible when you're scenario planning through the power of IBP. No questions. Okay, well, I'm going to take that as a good sign. Again, when you're weathering the storm, if you're talking about what if tariff planning, we've got a session coming up talking about currency devaluations and how you deal with uncertainties in global economies. So be sure and stay tuned and be on the lookout for that. But as always, check out our YouTube videos. We've got a lot of great IBP resources on all the modules, S&OP, demand, inventory, and some of our advanced analytics as well that you'll find useful in your practice. Follow us on LinkedIn. We try to be thought leaders and raise great conversations about supply chain management, advanced analytics, machine learning, and a lot of the things that we're really geeked out about. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And as always, if there's anything SCM Connections can do to make your world a better place, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you all so much.